Okay, hello everyone. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. Now, normally I got a nice pre-scripted video I wrote out, edited perfectly and all that jazz. But today we're going to, just a little casual session. So, obviously you saw the title will be Ranking the Founding Fathers in a Tier List. Isn't that interesting? So, can't wait. I think you'll be surprised. Some of these are going to make sense, of course, but I think you'll be surprised who I put at number one. And I think you'll be surprised it's who's near the bottom. So, yeah, just going to give, I'll cover each one, give them a brief backstory. This is just really off the cuff, so, forgive me if a detail here or there is wrong. It's not like I said, it's not like I got the script in front of me or anything, so really just going to be kind of freeballing it, as we'll see. So, cool, let's go ahead and get started. We are going to start with none other than the man himself, Mr. George Washington, and we are going to put him in the S tier. Now, did anyone really doubt this at all? I mean, I think, if they give, hey, who's the best president ever, it's usually Abraham Lincoln or Washington. For good reason. Normies don't really maybe understand exactly why, but, he's the father of our country, right? So, obviously, he gets a lot of shine, deservedly so. So, yeah, George Washington, he's in the S tier. Now, a lot of accomplishments under his belt, right? I mean, we got general of, the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War. Obviously, that was critical to American success. He was no Napoleon. Quite the opposite, actually. He was kind of mediocre as far as war generals go. Not the brightest, but to his credit, he knew when to retreat. He kind of knew when to engage. He listened to his council of generals. That was very important. You have guys like Nathaniel Greene who really had more of that strategic and tactical acumen that maybe Washington didn't possess, but Washington, ever the selfless person, right? He was quick to listen to them, and so, for instance, he abandoned his plan to attack New York later in the war to kind of seize victory at Yorktown, which was obviously a good idea. And if you read 1776 by David McCullough, he just lays out all the times that happened. But anyways, his strong suit was not military strategy. It was, of course, keeping the army together, right? He was a very charismatic person. He was kind of stoic. Obviously, he was a giant for the time. If you didn't know, he was like nearly 6'3" at a time when most men, I think, capped out at like 5'6", 5'7". And, he just behaved with dignity, right? He seemed in charge his whole life. He was fitted to be in charge. It was kind of like a match made in heaven there. So, he kept the army together. He retreated a lot. It's not like he won many stunning victories. You obviously have Trenton on Christmas morning. You have Yorktown, things like that. But a lot of his battles are losses. But the real key is, if you wanted to pick out something, it'd be Valley Forge, right? He's keeping the army together, right? Through winter and through cold and through starvation, he's keeping the army together. And that'll be a theme later. He keeps the country together, right? So obviously helping us win the Revolutionary War, incredible. And, to his credit, I guess, obviously he's with a much tinier army than the British. They're not nearly well trained, well supplied, what have you. And so, gargantuan task, he rose to it and he succeeded. So, that's incredible. As far as his, let's say political accomplishments, right? I mean, there's what else could be said, really, right? He presided over the Constitutional Convention, basically helped. What they say is he basically helped give a lot of power to the presidency, because when people were formulating the Constitution at the Constitutional Convention and they're talking about, well, who's this president going to be and why should he be trusted with power? They're looking to Washington in the seat. He was actually the chairman. He didn't really participate in a lot of debates. But they're looking at him and they're like, well, you know what? This guy can be trusted. And obviously he could, right? He surrendered his sword at the end of the war, and he retired to Mount Vernon after 2 terms. So he's kind of setting the bar there. Very selfless guy, modern day Cincinnatus, as people say. Shaped the way that the founding document of the country was formulated. And so, really, I mean, his impact can't be overstated. He's extremely influential, and obviously, this country would look, it might not even exist in its current form without George Washington. So, everyone kind of knows that. Everyone knows, okay, well, he led the Revolutionary Army. He, was the first president. He presided over the Constitution. He peaceful transition of power, all that stuff. How about his actual tenure in office? So, this one, it will be a little bit longer. Obviously, I want to talk about those in the S tier, top and bottom, maybe, than those in the middle. But at least for Washington, his presidency was a resounding success, too. You have Washington creating the National Bank. Obviously, he kind of signed it into law as opposed to creating it by fiat. But anyways, that was a great thing. A lot of people, especially maybe those who align with me more politically, would say the bank was a bad idea, but it wasn't. It was a great idea. It helped spur the economic development of this country. It helped orient capital towards the development of industry, which of course made America a superpower. And despite what critics say, it wasn't, just a tool for Hamilton and his lackeys to get rich. Obviously capital development acquires unequally, but that's just, a fact of life. So he has that. He has the Jay Treaty. He kind of normalized relations with Britain. Britain evacuated a lot of their posts, or at least they were supposed to, in the western United States. So obviously clearing Britain, or like I said, supposed to be clearing Britain out of American spheres of influence is a great thing. Reestablish trade relations with them. That's great. He set pretty good Indian policy. There was the war with the Northwestern Confederacy. Now, you could argue whose fault that was, but for the most part, I've quoted before Gordon Wood, and that Washington's policy with Indian affairs was about, acquiring the land via purchase as opposed to conquest, and so he kind of set the standard for amicable relations. He's sending agricultural tools. That was either him or Jefferson, but regardless, his stance to Indian policy is pretty good. Northwest War, kind of hands were tied a little bit in that situation. But anyways, resounding success as a presidency. He retires. Now, I don't really wish that he retired, to be honest with you. I know that's, obviously it's a noble and virtuous thing, but I kind of wish he set the standard of, elected monarch for life, basically. I mean, that would be ideal. I know that's kind of a hot take, and maybe I'll explain that later. But anyways, he did a lot of great things. I'm kind of blanking on some of the other stuff here now. Obviously, he had 8 years of presidency. But, he just kind of set the standard, right? He gave the presidency its character. He gave it a lot of its power. And he just kind of set the country up in a way that was antithetical to this more, southern states' rights, which was ironic because he's from Virginia. But he's kind of setting the standard of the federal government has the power to develop the country. And, industrializing in America is kind of finding its footing. It's resolving international crises. It's expanding its borders without trying to do so via war. And yeah, I mean, resounding success. Maybe not perfect. I don't think he was a political genius either. I don't think he was a military or political genius, but, very virtuous person and just, smart enough to listen to good counsel and to, hold the country together. Maybe that was the most important achievement. But anyways, I've probably gone on too long. Washington, S tier, obviously a legend. God rest his soul. Next, Benjamin Franklin. So I'm kind of hovering here, but I think I'm going to put, I'm going to put him in the A tier. I'm going to put Benny Frank in the A tier. So I will admit I'm not as familiar with Franklin as a lot of these others. But just to give you a short kind of synopsis, he was kind of like the old wizened, old wise elder, of the time. So obviously he's in the Declaration, or he's in the Continental Congress, I should say. He's kind of advocating in a moderate way, but he's advocating for American independence. He's at the Constitutional Convention as well. He's a little old and people maybe don't listen to him as much by then. He speaks out against slavery in the Constitutional Convention, which is awesome, but, that was just not an issue. That was going to be, win leeway with either side, so it's kind of embarrassing for a lot of the people involved. And he dies shortly thereafter, so he doesn't really have too much of an impact on the young republic, but he does a lot in the early stages of the American Revolution. And his primary contribution is he's like the great American diplomat. So he's in France and he's kind of rubbing elbows. Everyone loves him because he's like this genius inventor, lightning rod and the key on the kite and shit like that. And so he's doing all this stuff, inventing wise. He's helping spur like domestic production in America of like iron works and things like that. He's kind of collabing with, I think it was James Watt in England. Basically, he's a very like Enlightenment, let's develop the forces of production and benefit all of humanity and science and things like that. So obviously he's really loved in Europe, and that kind of gives him, top diplomat status. So, to what degree you could attribute the French being willing to join the American Revolution to him, I think it probably would have happened without him, but, he's kind of the main kind of engine there. So, that's pretty important. That's pretty critical. And he remains there, I think, for a couple years. I don't remember exactly when he returned to the U.S., but suffice it to say, he's really important in diplomatic relations with the French. And really, without the French, the American Revolution never would have succeeded. So that's great. I also like, he's coming to the Constitutional Convention. He's speaking out against slavery, so he's kind of setting the tone there. Like I said, it's not like that was going to change anything, but he's kind of given direction a little bit to the early republic. Like I said, he dies before I think even Washington takes office. But, he's still giving his piece, right? He's saying his last piece before he dies. I think the really important part actually comes in, he was like in Britain. He's kind of getting information from the British before the American Revolution. He's relaying that information. And one of my favorite anecdotes of him is that by the time things are kind of heating up between the colonies and Britain, he's, exposed as like a supporter of America, and just he has to, I don't know exactly what the political ritual is, but he has to like sit in the dock at the courtroom and just get shit on for hours. Everyone's like screaming at him, telling him he's a traitor and all this stuff. So, he was important in American independence. He was important in securing victory for America. And, he's an important inventor. So I think he's awesome. I think what kind of holds him back is, one, he was maybe a little bit of a weirdo in real life. Like I said, I don't know too much about him, but Adams didn't really have a lot of good to say about him. He thought he was kind of without morals. Adams kind of a New England Puritan, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. But anyways, the point being is he just doesn't have... He didn't really seem like a zealous kind of political figure. For him, it was almost maybe like a personal affair in a lot of ways. So, I don't know. I just think there's something that separates him from joining that S tier. But regardless, very heroic. One, the contributions to mankind via science were great, but then, helping us declare independence and then helping us win that independence, obviously, very important. All right, up next. Now, this is going to be controversial, but it's true. Thomas Jefferson we have in the C tier. Now, if we're going to just be honest about it, I think for a large portion of American history, I think people, whether they knew it or not, would say Jefferson is the most important. They would really point to Jefferson as the father of the country more so than Washington. Now, maybe that sounds crazy because, we're all taught in school that Washington is, but even in early America, the second Jefferson takes the presidency, close to maybe the majority of the population is overjoyed. They were kind of getting sick of Washington's policies. They viewed them as, Washington and Adams as well, but they viewed them as more, monarchical. Like, this is the same thing. Whoa, why are we kind of normalizing relations with Britain again? How come the federal government is powerful? How come Washington's creating this bank? How come, X, Y, and Z is happening? And really what Jefferson represents is mass democracy, and he represents America in the abstract. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Washington and Adams, they would point to the American Revolution and America itself as a definite people. In other words, hey, we come from England, and the reason we kind of orchestrated this whole revolution was because the King of England was violating our rights as Englishmen. The charter we were granted meant that, you couldn't dismiss our legislatures, and that's why we're rebelling. And now we need to lead America as a historical entity with roots that is not interchangeable with other people and that has a definite character, which may change over time, but certain measures have to be taken to ensure that you can't just impose a blank slate on America or try and make it something it's not. And Jefferson really represents, more than anyone, the idea of America as these abstract ideals. In other words, America is democracy. America is freedom. America is the right to vote. And America is about, liberation and things like that. So nowadays, when we think about America, really we're discerning that through Jefferson's philosophy, right? Like if you go to monuments, there's not a kind of implication that, hey, this is a historic nation with a definite character and a definite people, and that come from this tradition of Protestant Christianity with English characteristics, if that makes sense. It's really kind of these ideals. America it's not a nation necessarily. It's democracy. It's the right to decide the political process. So that's really what Jefferson's kind of aiming at. And very complicated legacy here because on the one hand, obviously all these founding fathers helped us win independence. So that's kind of a given, and that's obviously a big deal. So thanks for that, guys. Appreciate it. But Jefferson's entire legacy actually very mixed. Now, why do I say that? Well, like I said, he helped us win independence, I guess, via his pen, right? It's not like he fought, nor did he serve in Europe like Adams or Franklin. But, obviously, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Probably one of the most important phrases, not just in American history, but in world history. It's inspired revolutions the world over, the French Revolution and Russian Revolution being one or two of them. And, that is just one of the greatest political works of all time. And while Adams and Franklin contributed to that, along with some others, Jefferson's pen is kind of the main one there. So, that is just a monumental achievement. So we have to give him credit for that. But it's really after the Revolution that Jefferson starts to fall off a cliff. And the reason for that is Jefferson is kind of like the original crying liberal, if that makes sense. I know that seems a little far-fetched, but like I said, the tension at the time, early America, is between, hey, is America its own project, or is the American experiment really just one piece of the globe? We need democracy here, and therefore we're going to put in democracy everywhere. So someone like George Washington, Hamilton, Adams, they'd be like, hey, let's focus on America, please. More like America first. And Jefferson is furious because he's like, by the time the French Revolution rolls around, he's like, what the hell? We need to be sending armies to help them. We need to enact global revolution across all of Europe and the world, obviously. And, down with all kings, down with the aristocracy, everyone is equal. Now, obviously, that's ironic because Jefferson's a slaveholder, but, like I said, there are kind of extenuating circumstances in the U.S. onto why that's a bit of a tricky situation. But anyways, really what makes him such a complicated figure is that he kind of fractures America into two separate parties. Now, with a lot of these things, it's probably bound to happen, but he was how it happened. So, that blame still kind of rests on him. So during Washington's and Adams, especially Adams' administration, he's paying, political journalists and newspapers to kind of smear the Washington and Adams administration. He's calling Adams a toothless hermaphrodite. He's saying that Washington and Adams are just wanting to bring about the monarchy in America and basically, make everyone in the states, especially the southern states, slaves to the federal government. So it really can't be understated, how devastating that was. If you read any of the words of the Founding Fathers, they're always talking about factionalism is going to destroy this country. We kind of take it for granted that there's two parties and two competing visions for America. But really, back in the day, it wasn't necessarily so. There was this idea during Washington and Adams administration, well, maybe not Adams, but more Washington administration and later on in Monroe that, hey, it's one country, and really it's kind of a one-party state. Now, we may have disagreements here and there, but we all kind of represent the same ideals. We want the same things, and so there's not really two competing parties, and that starts to happen between Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Hamilton. And in my opinion, Jefferson is kind of causing that because, he is rabid about wanting international democracy and these kind of abstract ideals that he thinks he can separate from the, historical material reality of America's existence. So he drafts, along with Madison, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts and others by Adams, and he's basically starting the two-party system, not necessarily as we know it, but, as it existed back then. And so that was really devastating for America's development. I think without Jefferson, actually, it'd probably be easier to have abolished slavery earlier than when it happened. And so, yeah, I mean, that's pretty bad. It's hard to kind of give that portrait full justice, but if you read the book John Adams by David McCullough, you really get the sense of Jefferson being quite the stinker. So, not a fan of that. His presidency, kind of a mixed bag. He does he agitates against the bank. It's not like he can necessarily do anything about that, but he, severely decreases. He overturns a lot of what Adams does. He tries to get, the midnight judges removed. He really decreases the power and scope of the Army. I think he pauses all construction of the Navy, which ended up being very important in the War of 1812. Probably would have been a resounding American victory if he hadn't. And yeah, just generally diffuses this kind of idea of mass democracy instead of, land reallocation. Now, he was in support of that, but, definitely through him, the forces of mass democracy, abstract liberalism, and things like this prospered. Now, he did have a lot of good. The Louisiana Purchase, he would have maybe poo-pooed that during Washington and Adams administration because that's, technically speaking, overreach by the executive. But to his credit, he went forward with that, even though he maybe, technically shouldn't have. The Lewis and Clark expedition was awesome. I actually like the embargo against Great Britain. A lot of people say that was a failure, but, I think there are seeds of some really intelligent working there. Like, Britain was a definite threat to America at the time, and, that actually helped spur some American industrial production, which Jefferson wasn't a fan of. He kind of wanted this, globe, like continent-wide agricultural society, which is obviously silly. But, inadvertently maybe helped that a little bit. So that's good. And then, yeah, he relinquishes the presidency after 2 terms, and he, just kind of lives in Monticello ever since. But, yeah, he's kind of like the prototypical libtard. But, at the end of the day, he wasn't a traitor. So I think, a lot of achievements there, but it really can't be understated how devastating that conflict with Hamilton became. He even resigned from Washington's, he was the Secretary of State. He resigned. So that should really tell you all you need to know. So Madison, James Madison, I'm going to put him in the C tier, but below Jefferson. So a good way to think about Madison, he's kind of like Jefferson's henchman. And if you needed any evidence of that, there's literally a quote from Jefferson where he's like, "For God's sake, pick up your pen," and Hamilton's saying all this shit, pick up your pen and cut him to pieces. And so really Madison thinks a lot of the same shit as Jefferson. To Madison's credit, he really wasn't involved with the American Revolution too much, I guess in a kind of high office or anything like that. I think he was in the Virginia House of Burgesses at the time, which is, still important, but it's not like he had a role as important as Washington or Adams or anyone like that. Madison, I will say, kind of single-handedly made sure the Bill of Rights got put through. That was actually, believe it or not, that was kind of a controversy at the time. A lot of Federalists, like maybe Washington or Hamilton, was like, they thought the idea of a Bill of Rights was silly, not because they didn't care about rights, but they were like, yeah, I mean, why do you have to say that you have the right to do that? Like, that's obvious. They thought, like, if the government wasn't allowing you the right to free speech or to bear arms, then, you didn't really have a free government at all. So having the words on a piece of paper wouldn't help. But I think time has kind of shown that Madison was right. The actual court proceedings with the Bill of Rights have been very helpful to kind of secure American rights, especially with regards to free speech and the Second Amendment especially. But, yeah, so that's nice. But again, Virginia and Kentucky resolutions kind of creating that two-party system, bitching about America industrializing, basically so the South can just be like a massive kind of slave economy. Now, I don't think they were, evil enslavers who really just wanted to, oppress and enslave all black people. But, regardless, their kind of political ideologies helped shape the Confederacy and make the expansion and preservation of slavery easier. So that's not great. Madison's presidency is kind of similar to Jefferson's in that it is a mixed bag. They let the bank expire. I don't know if Madison vetoed it. I don't think he did. I just think it expired and Congress didn't re-up it. But, he was against the bank. He nominates Albert Gallatin, as his Secretary of the Treasury. And Gallatin, even a lot of founding fathers were accusing Gallatin of being a traitor in the 1790s. They think he fomented the Whiskey Rebellion. I don't know how true that is, but it kind of goes to show that, yeah, I mean, Gallatin is a very anti-federalist. He wants, power not in the hands of the federal government, which, therefore means it'll be in the hands of the slaveocracy in the South or, particular moneyed interests in the North that are not curtailed by the federal government. So, not a lot of great stuff there, but to his credit, he did begin the War of 1812. That's a really just war. A lot of people don't know too much about it. They know the White House burnt down, but, I mean, the British got what was coming to them, to be honest with you. They were agitating all across the frontier. They prepped an invasion of the U.S. from Canada, which is basically like British Empire 2.0. And yeah, I mean, they were impressing our sailors. They were, stealing our cargo, burning our boats, really just threatening our sovereignty and our trade. And yeah, they got what was coming to them. And, Madison, to his credit, he started that war. He called for the war to begin. And so, he took a while. He probably could have started it earlier, to be honest with you. But like Jefferson, he was no traitor. He was a patriot. I just think he, represented a different set of ideals and was maybe not as bright as some of these other ones. So that's where I'll put him. I'm not as good with Madison as I am with, Adams, Hamilton, or Washington. But yeah, overall, not that great, to be honest. I think that, and he's one, he gets glazed a lot, just to be honest with you. People say he's the father of the Constitution. It's like, no, I mean, okay, yeah. Did he do a lot of the groundwork for the Randolph Plan? That was actually what it was called. They call it the Virginia Plan now. It was originally called the Randolph Plan. Sure, but it was work of all the Virginia delegation. And what's more, it's like, the idea of like the bicameral house, 3 branches of government. It's like Adams was talking about that years before. And, I even think that was something that Montesquieu was talking about like 100 plus years before. So, it's not like he invented that out of thin air. Now, credit to him. He did submit the plan as it was, and that's kind of what shaped the document. But I don't know. He didn't invent the science of government out of thin air. So that's where Madison goes. All right. Now, this is going to ruffle some feathers, but it's just facts. John Adams. We have John Adams at the top. Number 1. He's over George Washington. Now, probably not. They're probably about equal. It's hard to really beat Washington. But Adams is my favorite. I think he's by far the most underrated one. I think he's the most insightful founding father. You'll notice I probably quote him a lot. He's not necessarily a brave, courageous hero in the same way that Washington is, right? Washington's riding on the field of battle. But I mean, wow, Adams just incredible. So what a lot of people don't know is that during deliberations on should we declare independence, or that was a very, some people just think, oh, they wanted to declare independence and then they just did. It's like, well, no, a lot of people, especially in non-New England states, New England's kind of the birthplace of the Revolution. A lot of these other states really just didn't want to declare independence at all. I mean, they're like, hey, we're British subjects, we shouldn't do this. I believe John Dickinson is saying, we're riding out in a hurricane and a boat made of paper is basically what he says if we declare independence. And it's really Adams, he's called the Colossus of Independence, I believe Jefferson calls him. He kind of helps America actually decide to declare independence, right? He is the one, he's making the arguments, he's spitting facts. We don't know exactly what he said, but everyone talks about how important Adams was in that process. And I mean, really, that just can't be understated, right? I mean, that is such a monumental and important thing. And it's hard to say, without Adams, I mean, what exactly would have happened there, right? So, I mean, he was just, New England Yankee, and he's like, actually, he's spurring independence. He's like, get the fuck in line. We're doing this shit. And he's just like, you know what? The time for peace is past. My wife and children are over there, and Gage and his savages are coming to kill them. And so we're declaring independence. Now, the Congress doesn't even listen initially, but, that just speaks to how reticent the Congress was to actually declare independence. And, obviously they did on, I believe, July 2nd, they actually voted to do so, and 4th is when they ratified it. But anyways, Adams drives that whole process, and, you never hear about that, and that's a shame. They kind of just make it seem like maybe Sam Adams and Jefferson got together and just invented the idea of being independent, and Adams traces the history from, the glorious Puritan forefathers, the Pilgrims, and he discusses, why they came, and I don't know. He has a solid foundation for why we should declare independence, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit later with him, but I'll just wrap that up. Now, during the war, and this is also another underrated issue, he actually goes to France. He joins Franklin, and he's trying to help, conduct diplomacy there, but the French don't like him. And the reason the French don't like him is because he's bold and brash, to quote SpongeBob. Talking about John Adams, he's bold and brash. He's, he tells it how it is. He's telling them, he's like, I study war and politics so my sons can study poetry and stuff like that. And, he doesn't hide back. He doesn't, do the diplomatic niceties. He's an American, right? He doesn't have time for that bullshit. He's here to do a job, and he's not sucking up to nobles. He's being himself. And that's just so cool. I mean, who can't relate to that, right? Like, I don't know, maybe if you're like an aristocratic Southerner, you're like, he has no manners, but that's just so relatable. It's like these fucking Frenchies or these British, are you kidding? Like, no thanks. I'm not doing the waltz. I'm putting my fucking elbows on the table. I'm putting my elbows on the table, and that's how it is, bitch. And I'm not saying thank you. No, I probably said thank you. I'm getting a little crazy right now. But anyways, he's a failure in France, and him and Franklin hate each other after that. Adams is like, Franklin's a piece of shit. He's fucking all these French whores. This is crazy. I really didn't mean to swear this much, but it is what it is. But anyways, they hate each other. And so Congress sends Adams to the Netherlands. And the Netherlands are really popping off at this time, maybe a little bit more in the past, but they have a lot of money. And so what Adams does is he secures Dutch loans to keep both the war effort going and to sustain the American states after the War of Independence. And that is, I mean, you never hear about that as a kid. I mean, I know it's like as a kid, who wants to hear about that shit? But that is just so important. And he writes what's called the Model Treaty. And the Model Treaty is basically a template for how we engage in diplomacy and conduct treaties with foreign nations. And so very important to Adams in that is to say, let's not bind ourselves to any country, right? It's not like France is helping us out of the kindness of their heart. So what France maybe wants to do is make the colonies a protectorate, basically kind of not independent in a way, right? Or they want to be like, you can only trade with us. Again, not really independent. And so Adams does the realpolitik, which just means like real nitty-gritty politics of, hey, how are we conducting diplomacy and how do we actually get help in engaging Britain? Again, I mean, that's really underrated, right? Like, without France and maybe with Spain, it's like, man, that war effort, it would, without France, we're fucked. But, all these, without Dutch loan, we're screwed as well. So, super important work. And then finally, to cap off his service there, he negotiates the Treaty of Paris. And he really slyly, along with the other commissioners, I believe it was Franklin, got to give Franklin props for that as well, but really with the other commissioners, he's establishing, hey, this is how it's going to work. And, the details maybe not super important because it's not like everything was rectified after the fact, but he was smart enough to be like, hey, we need to just get recognition of our independence and we need to conduct diplomacy with them. We need to normalize relations with them. And so, obviously the Treaty of Paris is a success. Like I said, some of the details get hammered out via politics later, but you get the idea. It helps recognize American independence, and he got out from the French actually gave them instructions to be like, hey, don't negotiate with Britain without us. And France was kind of trying to screw over the U.S. You don't hear that either. And, deftly, the commissioners were like, no, we're going to act on our own. And like, sorry, France, we're going to do whatever the fuck we want. Like I said, this is offhand, so the details are not perfect, but you get the idea. And so he does that. And then I believe after that, he kind of is in the court of St. James in Britain. That is like the king's court. And he is like the ambassador to Great Britain. Really fascinating anecdote. You can look it up on YouTube. It's like the John Adams miniseries. John Adams meets King George for the first time. Fascinating. And it happened in real life, too. It's taken from that book, John Adams by David McCullough. But really fascinating interaction there. Just wanted to throw that out. And then as far as, what he does there, obviously, there's nothing too crazy, but, he's spending time away from his family, right? I think he has Abigail come out. But, this is someone who's already spent years apart from his family, and he's once again answering the call of Congress to do his duty there. All right, now we come to the Washington administration. He is elected the vice president. One of the most important vice presidents in history, and why is that? Well, he cast the most tie-breaking votes of anyone in American history. And I think he actually was the one who allowed, now I don't know if it was the bank, but a major piece of legislation, wouldn't have passed without Adams, right? Or if Adams said no. So, he's contributing to that Federalist agenda, which is a good thing. And moreover, he's also writing about the French Revolution at the time. Now, this is very important. Why? Because Adams supports the revolution in theory. But what he doesn't support is this kind of maniacal commitment to just abstract revenge, democracy, freedom, just for freedom's sake. And he, along with his son, John Quincy, are making the case that, no, like, hey, hierarchies exist. Just because someone has more money than you doesn't mean they're evil or stole it from you necessarily. Now, sometimes that is the case with European aristocracy, like he's a revolutionary after all, but what he's really saying is like, hey, we need to be grounded in law. Like, we can't just cut the fucking king's head off. When Cromwell cut Charles' head off, they had a trial, right? They're pointing to specific things. Hey, you breached your obligation to the public and you tried to declare you brought foreign armies in to kill Englishmen. And so Adams is really making this case, and he's like, hey, you need Christianity, man. Like he says, what else could you expect from a nation of godless atheists, which is awesome. And so, he's kind of setting the ideological standard, at least for the Federalist side. So, against Jefferson's libtardism, for lack of a better term. So, that's awesome. And then you get to his presidency, and this is where a lot of people say he sucked. You know, what people remember about him is the Alien and Sedition acts, but those were actually good. Now that's a scorching hot take. I mean, this is the best. You'll never get content like that. Like, where would you get content like this, huh? You're never gonna get the historical insight on YouTube. Like that the Alien and Sedition acts were awesome. Are you serious? So really, I mean, just soak that in, because it took me forever to find out shit like this, and now you're getting it to you like a baby bird. So there you go. But as far as the Alien and Sedition acts, I mean, one that everyone just talks about the sedition one, but what he was doing was, France was actively agitating. Britain was as well for the opposite, but France was kind of the popular front at the time. The people of America really supported France, and so they're kind of agitating for American support for the French Revolution. So you have like the French ambassadors coming, and he's just stirring up rallies and controversy and all this shit. And Washington actually has to ask France to recall him and be like, get him the fuck out of here. When Jefferson sent the Lewis and Clark expedition, he, sent this guy from France, and it turns out he was just a British spy, French spy, and he's exploring the West basically to tell France, like, okay, this is what's going on, and maybe we can establish an outpost here and stuff. So France is really, busting our balls, for lack of a better term. And so what Adams does is he makes American citizenship more restrictive. I think it's like you have to live here for over 14 years. You have to be the son of a citizen or something like that. I don't remember. I know the 14 years one, but all the other stuff, not too sure about the details. But anyways, he makes it harder to be a citizen, which is a good thing, by the way. And then the Sedition Act. So this is another thing Gordon Wood talks about. People think he made it illegal to talk against the government, but that's not what it was. It was to slanderously lie about the government, which people like Jefferson were doing at the time. And, I mean, that was a crime in all of the state governments at the time. Like, if you slanderously lied about Virginia, that was a crime. It's not like he made that a crime out of thin air. And, of course, slander against a person is a crime, so why wouldn't slander against a government be a crime? Now, obviously, the government has incentive to, jail and imprison people, but still, I think the principle's pretty solid. And anyways, the consideration was that for the federal government, what they did was, evidence had to be procured. So in some of these state governments, it wasn't even, too important that you had evidence, that you had to prove it. But, with the Sedition Acts, you did have to prove in court that, they slanderously lied and they knew about it. So it's really not as bad as people think. So, I think he's pretty cool. And I don't really care. It should be harder to be an American citizen. That's partly what helped Rome fall, they say. So, yeah, I think that was awesome. One of his biggest achievements was actually avoiding war with France. You may have heard it's called like the Quasi-War. So basically at the time, France and Britain are beefing, and they're both trying to destroy the other's trade. So like if France sees an American ship heading for Britain, they're like, we're taking all your shit, or, you can't sell this, you have to come put it in France, or, whatever. I don't remember the specifics, but you get the idea. They're kind of taking our ships and impressing our sailors, right, which is fucked up. And so, these things kind of culminate in escalations of hostilities, and eventually America sends a delegation to France to be like, hey, can we figure this out? And the main minister in France, his name's Talleyrand, actually very important. He tries to make the American diplomats pay a huge bribe to even have an audience with him. And, obviously at the time, that's a very, even now, that's like an extremely inappropriate thing to do. And so, the American diplomats refuse. They report back to it, and things get so heavy. Hamilton's even trying to get a war and just be like, let's just declare war on France. But Adams he's shrewdly negotiating. He's not releasing too much detail to the public. It's called the XYZ affair. He doesn't name the diplomats, and he's opening up channels of communication with the French, I think, directory at the time. And, everyone hates him. Everyone thinks he's being a total bitch. But before the election of 1800, they actually find out that no, Adams was right. Or maybe it was shortly after. But anyways, before it can really affect the election, they find out, France agrees to stop that. There's peace. No war happens. And Adams doesn't really get the credit for that. So he saved this country from going to a needless war. So, I mean, that's awesome. As we know, Jefferson kind of destroys him in the election of 1800. Burr does as well. So not good for Adams. People didn't really like him. He doesn't have the kind of charisma of a Washington or a Jefferson. He doesn't have the same connections as maybe someone like a Hamilton. But, he's a patriot through and through. And his writings kind of form like the actual genius of American political thought. And so, he's writing about constitutions, the French Revolution, how America should be, what America really is about. And so, in that sense, he's really invaluable. He's the smartest mind of the founding fathers without question. And, just a great guy. Man, I've gone on really long for him. I didn't think it'd go that long, so I'll probably kind of hurry these other ones up. But you're getting a lot of good content here. Let's go Patrick Henry. I'm going to put Patrick Henry at B. He's the famous "Give me liberty or give me death," which is a hard-ass quote. And, I don't really think he's too much involved with the actual struggle of the war for independence, but just to kind of tell you a little bit about him, he was very anti-Constitution. He was a big states' rights guy, which sometimes is a red flag, but I think, as we'll see in his case, was just out of, personal conviction. And so he's doing all he can to be like, do not ratify this, Virginia. This document sucks. But to his credit, once it is ratified, he's like, you know what? This is what my country's done. And he works as much as he can to have political unity with America. And he actually excoriates some of the anti-federalists after the fact, or people who would want to rebel against the U.S., or people like Jefferson or Madison who were sowing division. I don't think he attacked them personally, but you get the idea. He was definitely a patriot. He let go, he recognized the writing on the wall, and he just said, I'll get with the program. Sort of like a John Dickinson. So, cool guy for that. I know the least about him by far of anyone. So, there we go. Moving on, Mr. Samuel Adams. We're going to put him in the A tier. Legend. Now, people know a lot about him, but, he doesn't get the shine. When you read a lot of books about the founding generation, I feel like he doesn't get a lot of shine. I don't think he has a ton of biographies. Now, it makes sense he doesn't have as many as, Washington, but still, I don't know. He doesn't get that much shine. And his genius is really in the years before the Declaration of Independence. So he's the one. I don't think he orchestrated the Tea Party himself. Maybe he did. Maybe I'm blanking on that one. But he's kind of orchestrating all this stuff, and he's the propaganda machine for independence. So when the Boston Massacre happens, he's turning this, and it was terrible, right? But even his own cousin John is defending the British soldier, but he's like, these fucking British, these lobster back ass motherfuckers, oh my gosh. So, he's establishing what's called the Committees of Correspondence, which is really a revolutionary thing. You have all this kind of crossover and discussions between towns in New England. People are getting educated. People are talking about their grievances. They're sharing information. They're kind of making political maneuverings. But he's kind of like the mouthpiece of independence before it actually happens. And so what's funny is you'll have, the Tea Party and stuff like that, and then Britain cracks down super hard, or they let go. If they kind of okay, all right, yeah, we messed up a little bit. So they repeal something, and most of the colonists are like, all right, whatever, water under the bridge. Adams is like, fuck, I need to get them to get pissed off again. And so he's doing all he can to be kind of present a united front, get the colonies together, and just kind of keep that flame going of hey, remember how these guys want to keep us in slavery, and just because they repealed one law, maybe it's, maybe there's a deeper problem here. And so, yeah. So, that's awesome, right? I don't think independence happens without him. And you can kind of get a sense of that because John Adams said that when he went to Europe for the first time, everyone was bummed out that it was him because they thought he was Sam Adams. So Sam Adams, kind of a legend for that. Let's go. I mean, that's can't be understated. I think anti-slavery as well. Adams was as well, but I've mentioned it before. It's like that's really not an issue that's going to be solved in that generation, no matter what happens. So maybe not as impactful, but that's cool. The New England founding fathers are really goated. Now, he really isn't a big supporter of the Constitution, which is surprising, but he's like the Northern Patrick Henry, which is to say, they had a lot of good ideas, and they did a lot for us, but they were like really committed. Now, it's not bad to be committed to your ideals or your ideas, but it just seemed like they were kind of frozen in time and couldn't realize, like, hey, maybe the problem is not that the government has power, but like who's wielding the government, right? So that's all I'll say about that. To his credit, he was against like kind of mindless well, not mindless, but he was against rebellion, like in Shays' Rebellion. He was like, fucking kill them all, like rebellion against a republic is like worthy of death, whereas Jefferson's like, a little rebellion's good every now and then. But yeah, not super pro Constitution, which is a shame, because that was kind of like a triumph over the slave power in the South in a lot of ways. So, it is what it is. It is what it is. It's not like he maybe had that ulterior motive like a Jefferson or Madison, but, maybe a little bit more activity, maybe if he won, I think he was governor of Massachusetts, but I don't know. If we just had a little bit more activity after and not that, stain of anti-constitutionalism, then maybe he'd be higher. But, hey, still one of the best, kind of a legend. Alrighty, up next, my computer's bugging, but we have Mr. Hamilton. Now, I'm going to put Hamilton in the A tier, maybe between Franklin or Adams. There's no real ranking here, but in the tier itself. But Hamilton, wow, really interesting story. He comes from the West Indies. He's like born a bastard. And he, everyone pays his way. You've seen the play. I'm sure you've seen the play, so you know the story. But anyways, he fights in the American Revolution. He's aide-de-camp to Washington. Really fascinating story there. He's boys with Lafayette. It's badass. And really, he shines after the war. So he's aide-de-camp to Washington, which is cool. But he is kind of the main voice for the Constitution. Obviously, you've heard of the Federalist Papers. And Madison writes those as well. He kind of turns his back on that philosophy later. But Hamilton's the main mouthpiece. So in a lot of ways, some people say that ultimately, the Federalist Papers were just for people in New York, and it didn't really have too much of an impact on the Constitution. But, regardless of if the Constitution would have been passed or not without them, it probably would have. It's still very important for the development of America and American political thought. So, super important there. And then really his importance is, one, as Secretary of the Treasury under Washington's administration, he kind of concocts the whole First National Bank. He concocts like the new financial scheme of America. He rightly recognizes that manufacturing is maybe a little more important than agriculture, and this is where the source of American wealth is going to come. We'll finance it by tariffs, which is how we protect our industry from British free trade. And, we'll assume all the state's debts to increase, trust in American credit. And I mean, that's just genius, to be honest. So really can't underestimate that at all. It's sad that, we don't really have a system like that now anymore. That's a story for another time. But yeah, I mean, that's genius, right? So really kind of a boss, probably the best Secretary of the Treasury we've ever had. That's why his statue's outside of it in D.C. And the other aspect of it is that he is really the other side of the coin of Jefferson. So like I said, I still put a little bit of the blame on Jefferson, or most of the blame. But, Hamilton represents, no, we want the strong government. We want, America to be a nation state similar to England. We don't just want it to be this, like, hippie democracy where everyone's like a farmer. He's like, no, we want to build shit and have canals and develop manufacturing. And we're actually, maybe we shouldn't get involved in other countries' affairs. Like, that sucks for them. But, hey, we got to take care of ourselves. Very prudent. But he starts he's participating in the flame war with Jefferson. And so in that sense, I guess he's one of the, political parties of the U.S. But, overall, he was right. So it's not really to put too much blame on him. Where I don't really like him, I think he was personally ambitious in a way that Adams and Washington were not. So he kind of tanks Adams' presidency for, who can really say? I mean, obviously, he has his specific reasons. He doesn't think he's strong enough with France. He just doesn't think he's a capable leader too much. Adams is a little more hesitant on some of the Hamilton financial schemes. And so I just think Hamilton thinks Adams is kind of a fool. But yeah, he writes this long thing and it gets leaked. And very embarrassing for Hamilton. But he kind of helps tank Adams' presidency. So Adams really fucking hates him. It's funny because Adams and Hamilton are pretty similar politically. But Adams and Jefferson are like best friends. And, he shits on, if you read their letters, he's shitting on Hamilton very constantly, which is pretty funny. But, I just think he was ambitious. I think he was quick to want to start a war with France. He thought a standing army was more important than a navy. And Adams was proved right about the navy later on in his life. So, he just had some shit going on. He cheated on his wife and then exposed himself for it. Probably shouldn't have done that. Gave Jefferson a lot of ammo. But anyways, still had a lot of great ideas. A genius. His letter to a farmer refuted before the revolution is actually pretty good for analyzing, like, hey, this is how the revolutionaries actually thought of the situation, as opposed to, mindless, just, I love democracy and I want to be represented when I'm taxed. It's a little bit different. So, yeah, he's a good guy. All right. Bottom. Thomas Paine. D tier. He sucks. He sucks. Now, he has some fire-ass lines, like the what is it, Summer Soldier and the Sunshine Patriot, whatever it is. These are the times that try men's souls. It's not that he wasn't a patriot necessarily. Because obviously, common sense kind of flares everyone up, and, he's excoriating the public to be like, come on, like, yeah, I know it's hard, but let's keep fighting. But anyways, he does a lot of good, but it's really, we talk about Jefferson being this radical, Democrat, for lack of a better term. Paine is he is just the epitome of, he's like Jefferson on steroids. So, everyone hears about common sense, right? And, how it's basically like one of the founding documents of America. A lot of people make it seem. But that's really like the Jefferson side of history. Because if you read Common Sense, and I've read Common Sense because I'm a fucking genius, but if you read Common Sense, it's really not like Adams was like, or John Adams was like, common sense is trash, because what common sense is doing is being like, we don't need a fucking king. We don't need an aristocracy. Everyone's the same. And we can run our own affairs. Now, some of it's true in that, our trade with England is regulating our trade for its own purposes. But the kind of main thrust of common sense is like, no king, no gods, no masters type shit. And that's really, not necessarily what the American Revolution was about. For some it was, but, for someone like me, someone like John Adams, it was like, no, actually, we do believe in some sense of hierarchy, maybe not like an artificial aristocracy, but, we believe God, and that, some hierarchy is good, and that we can't just, in the name of revolution, do whatever the hell we want and kill everyone. I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here, but you get the idea. And so, really, a lot of that is manifested. Paine is bitching about Washington and Adams like crazy during their administrations. which is just like, really, man? Like, yeah, how are you gonna complain about what they're doing? It's like it's not even that big of a deal. It's not like they're like trying to destroy the revolution in France, but they're just like, hey, can we deal with our own problems? France is going a little off the rails, so maybe let's chill on that. And also, like, I don't know, maybe this idea of mass democracy and complete equality for everyone is somewhat of an illusion right now. So it's funny because in France, Payne is, I think he's actually like helping them draft some of their declarations. I don't remember specifically what he's doing, but of course, eventually they turn on him, jail him, and he's about to be killed. And it's only because of James Monroe actually helped secure his release, if I'm not mistaken. So, it's just funny. I think Monroe was in Jefferson's cabinet. Could be Jefferson or Madison, but you get the idea. I guess Napoleon would have been in charge by then, but whatever. Like I said, I don't know the specific details, but he has to get bailed out by the same country he's kind of talking shit about. So, just kind of a radical libtard. Not a whole lot redeeming either, to be honest. I mean, the Sunshine Patriot thing is good, but it's like he's mainly known for common sense. And, while it is interesting, it's of historical value. His vision of America is not one that I think is proper. I think it's kind of just like a delusional, rabid ideologue type viewpoint. So, not a fan. Not a fan of the, he's pompous as well. I didn't like that either. So, yeah, that's basically it. So, if we want to kind of go, the tiers, we got Adams and Washington top tier, Franklin, Hamilton, and Sam Adams right below him. Patrick Henry, a little bit in his own. Jefferson and Madison in C, and then Thomas Paine in D. So, worst founding father. Now, there are others, but, these are really the most important ones. I think there's like 9. Probably really only 10 ones that you should need to know. But, yep, that's what we got. So, thanks everyone for listening. See ya.